So the reliability on transatlantic partnership every day to all the future is fragile. And in this context, there is our direct neighborhood, not only in the east with the war in Ukraine, but also in the south with 10 wars and conflicts, from the Western Sahara to Iran, including these very prominent conflicts we have on Israel-Palestine to Iran and the Gulf. And in this context, the EU is much more pressured to act jointly and not only by words, but also by deeds.
The European Union has strategies for the Middle East. It has funding, partnerships, diplomatic tools. But when crises escalate, Europe often fails to act, not because it lacks resources, but because it cannot agree. From Gaza to Syria to Libya, even to Iran, internal divisions keep shaping and limiting Europe's role in its own neighborhood. In this episode, I speak with Christian Hanelt, senior expert on Europe, its neighborhood and the Middle East at the Bertelsmann Stiftung. A conversation about one central question: can the EU act even when it is divided? Welcome to Focus Nahost. My name is Josephine Herrmann. Europe is facing a moment of geopolitical pressure. The war in Ukraine, escalation in the Middle East, growing competition with China, and at the same time, rising instability across Europe's southern neighborhood. From migration to energy security, from trade routes to regional stability, what happens in the Middle East and North Africa directly affects Europe. And yet, despite having strategies, funding, and political influence, the European Union often struggles to act or does not act at all. Why is that? At a recent roundtable in Berlin, hosted by the Bertelsmann Stiftung, experts discussed a new policy brief that addresses exactly this question. It is titled Acting Without Unanimity: How the EU Can Deliver in MENA. My guest today is Christian Hanelt. He is senior expert on Europe, its neighborhood, and the Middle East at the Bertelsmann Stiftung, where he focuses on EU foreign policy, the Middle East and North Africa, and relations with the Gulf region. For decades, he has worked on key regional issues, from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to political and economic developments across the Arab world, as well as the drivers of migration. He began his career as a journalist in the early 1990s, reporting on the aftermath of the Gulf War and the beginning of the Middle East peace process, and has since been closely following the region and Europe's role in it. A conversation about why the EU struggles to act, where internal divisions come from, and what could realistically change. Christian, let me start very broadly. The EU has strategies, instrument, funding, and yet often struggles to act in the Middle East. What is the core problem?
The core problem is the context and the way how the EU is taking decisions. The core context, dear Josephine, is that the EU is very much under geoeconomic and geostrategic pressure. You see, it's not only the war of aggression of Putin against Ukraine, it's also the very complicated de-risking of China, and it is this unpredictability of Trump and the Trump administration in the transatlantic relations. So the reliability on transatlantic partnership every day to all the future is fragile. And in this context, there is our direct neighborhood, not only in the east with the war in Ukraine, but also in the south with 10 wars and conflicts, from the Western Sahara to Iran, including these very prominent conflicts we have on Israel-Palestine to Iran and the Gulf. And in this context, the EU is much more pressured to act jointly and not only by words, but also by deeds. And here is the dilemma of the structures and of the will of member states to act really jointly in all the political instruments and in all their activities.
You argue that EU member states often share the same goals, but differ in how to pursue them. Can you explain what that looks like in practice?
Josephine, there's a big dilemma on the one hand between the political declarations and the great goals and strategies, which are good. So the EU is, since the foundation of the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership in 1995, committed to work for peace, stability, and welfare for all the countries around the Mediterranean, meaning in Europe, as well as the Middle East and North Africa, knowing that we are bound to cooperate. geographically, historically, economically, and politically. So on the other hand, there are national interests. All the EU member states, we are now 27. When the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership has been founded, we were 15. And you see, the more member states there are, the more diverse views are there. So there are two layers of let me say, national interests. The one are the very specific national sensitivities. There are economic export and import interests. Yeah. We need gas and oil. We need energy imports. On the other hand, we want to increase our exports of our industrial products, cars to the Gulf. We need IT expertise from Israel. We want to export our agriculture to North Africa. And every member state has their own national economic interests. And then there are the cultural and, let me say, societal sensitivities. Yeah, there are colonial roots in Spain, in France. There are historical sensitivities, what we have with our Jewish community and with Israel, other countries have as well. And here you see there are a mix of national constraints on the one hand, and on the other there is the need to act jointly in a new geographical and geopolitical environment where international law doesn't play a strong role. The EU could, but the others, most of them, do not act like this. And in this dilemma, we are really forced to act jointly. And then there's a second level of examples I would like to explain to you and to our listeners. With 27 member states, they are in different geographical contexts. I explained also the economic and cultural different backgrounds, but they have also a very basic foreign policy strategies, national ones. There you have the group, who are very much on the normative humanitarian angle, like Ireland and Belgium, Luxembourg, for example. There are those, at the east who are close to the Ukrainian-Russian war. They are very much security-driven in how they decide in Brussels. And then you have the countries that fear, irregular migration. They are very much migration-focused, like Italy and Greece, for example. And that also dominates how they see the decisions that have to be taken in the Foreign Affairs Council. Yeah. And then, when you see all these, let me say, these diversities of national interests, you see how difficult it can be to find a joint action and policy when you need unanimity of 27 member states. And while foreign policy is not yet an issue of qualified majority voting, only economic issues, but not foreign policy and security issues, they really need to come together. And there is a chance, while Hungary, which blocked everything on foreign policy, not only in Ukraine, but also in a lot of conflicts vis-à-vis the Middle East, maybe there's a chance now that the 27 member states can act much more, let me say, in partnership together.
Where does this fragmentation become most visible? Let's take one example, for instance, Israel-Palestine.
Yes, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the most sensitive of all these 10 wars and conflicts we have in the Middle East and North Africa. This is due to the national constraints, some of the national economic and also historical backgrounds. You see, our German approach. We feel a special responsibility for the security and the existence of the state of Israel. Others also do, like Lithuania, for example, Bulgaria, Austria. There are some, who see this, and I think it's important to distinguish in the Middle East between the Netanyahu government on the one hand side and Israel on the other. And there are also, different positions of EU member states towards the Palestinian Authority. Some believe, their support should not be given because there is no legitimacy. Others say, we always say we need a two-state solution, and we need not only financially to support them, but also politically we need to take a stand. So still, it's not very clear which steps to take to have to be taken. They want to work for the two-state solution. They want to have a pro-peace stance. I think with all the diversities, specifically in this conflict, in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where you have Ireland, Spain, and Belgium on the one hand, who want to acknowledge the state of Palestine, and on the other hand, governments like Lithuania and Austria and Germany who have different sensitivities. We can build bridges between these 2 or 3 different camps regarding Israel and Palestine. We can strongly support Israeli and Palestinian civil society. We can much more, support the building up of state institutions in Gaza, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and third, we can show, the conflict parties in Israel and the Palestinian territories the diversity of our opinions. We have a special representative, a French diplomat. Maybe he needs more support from member states, and member states can build subgroups of member states. So why not form a group of maybe 5 or 6 or 4 EU member states that are mirroring the different perspectives, from Ireland to Austria, or from Spain to Greece vis-à-vis the conflict, and these foreign ministers travel together with the High Representative Kaja Kallas and the EU Special Representatives when they have missions to Israel-Palestine. Then they can show, okay, we have different opinions towards your conflict. Yeah, we can show this in our delegation, but we work together because the solution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is close to our heart, because every spillover effect of a conflict between both of you, we feel in Europe, and we just would like to help you now, to solve this conflict. There is a direction.
If we look at the current situation around Iran, escalation, deterrence, uncertainty, what does fragmentation mean there? Is the EU able to act at all in a moment like this?
Iran is the second sensitive issue, Josephine, after the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because we are here also in a dilemma. On the one hand, we share the goals of the US and also of Israel towards the threat perceptions of this Iranian leadership or Iranian regime. The nuclear threat, the missile threat, the support of regional proxies, the support of the Russian war in Ukraine, and specifically the human rights and the strong human rights and governance deficits. We share that, yeah? But the tools, the way of the war and how to end the war, there we very much differ. It's not just that we have not been informed and that we have not been consulted, but we very much differ. And now we are as well, like the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, victims of the spillover effects of that ongoing war and not really ceasefire. And here to find a way, on the one hand, to say, yes, we want to help, for example, in maritime security in the Gulf after the war is finished. But when is the war really finished? And secondly, now the regime in Iran is much more, let me say, radical, militarized, autocratic, suppressing their people than it was before. Are we ready to talk to such a government
or
not? This is where the EU decision taking is in a strong dilemma. I think a very practical, let me say, 3 things now are very important. And that is, to support the Iranian people with internet access. There's only internet in Iran for the regime supporters, but for most parts of the society there is none. And we need internet also to do business. It's not just for communication, for business. So let us show the Iranian people here our solidarity. And secondly is the solidarity with the people in the Gulf Cooperation Council. We have very strong security, but also economic and trade interests with these 6 rich Arab countries. There is now a strong diplomatic consultation with both sides. Fortunately, we have a very acknowledged and high acknowledged EU Special Representative for the Gulf region. Since the war started, he was there several times, also together with the EU Council President Costa, with the High Representative Kaja Kallas, to show the solidarity. And the EU is on the way to upgrade its maritime missions. The one is in the Red Sea, because the Red Sea is the other important interconnectivity route for trade and economic relations. The Gulf is the other one. And there is a mission of European member states under the leadership of France and Britain. And this can be upgraded, maybe a much more robust mandate. And to decide now together when this should start, that is on our list of tasks.
Your paper, your policy brief, suggests that the EU should act more flexibly, even without full unanimity. What does that actually mean in practice?
That means in practice that that we use some of the articles of the EU contracts, saying that use in some instruments more strategically. That means when we have a very high acknowledged EU representative for the Gulf region and we have 10 wars and conflicts, why don't we not have it for the other conflicts in our region? One person with a good team of national diplomats supporting him for the other conflicts. So it's the burden sharing, use the possibilities of burden sharing and of flexible cooperation, meaning we have more presence and more impact when there is EU special representative for one region, like in the Gulf or in the Middle East. Now, specifically also for Syria and Libya, these are also very important conflicts for us. Yeah, we don't look into that direction, but they are very important. They have very much spillover effects to Europe, not just migration, energy, modernization, interconnectivity. So there the EU is not present. Yeah. So the stronger European role can be shown by an EU special representative also for that region, very much acknowledged by the partners and with EU member states. And secondly, what I also suggested for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if there are sensitive conflicts, maybe also for Iran now, let us see which EU member states want to engage in that conflict. And let us look beyond the classical ones, beyond France, Italy, and Germany. We have small member states. We have also new member states. I have been, on this policy brief. I worked in the consultation phase and in a survey together with 27 experts from all 27 EU member states, and we all learned, for example, Bulgaria wants to play a stronger role in Israel-Palestine. Romania wants to play a stronger role in Syria. So that tells me, ask also the new and small member states to take more responsibility on behalf of all the 27. There's no need that Germany is involved everywhere. There's no need that France is involved everywhere.
But do you think this is realistic politically? Would member states actually accept that kind of flexible cooperation?
They already also use it from time to time. Yeah. You see, they are able to formulate an EU Gulf strategy and to put an EU special representative in this position. They are, perhaps you remember this EU heads of states council meeting where the Chancellor Scholz and others, convinced Orban to consult the toilet when there was the voting on a package for support for Ukraine. So that are, let me say, small tools where you can nevertheless take a decision. Yeah? Take a decision. And the one who doesn't want to do it can save his face. In the end of the day, we come again to the thing: are we able to act together when we see that national member states are too weak enough? We see it again specifically in trade issues. The Commission is the one with, who is the main actor on trade issues. We need a diversification of our foreign relations. We see that EU is viewed stronger when there is a larger free trade agreement with Latin America, with India, with Canada, with Australia. Now with the Gulf Cooperation Council, they are buying our products. They are investing in our economies. We should help them to secure their security because it's our joint security. So when our small political tools can much more support our economic and trade strategies, which are stronger, we can come out of a position to be an object to a position to be a subject, and we feel this every day in handling the transatlantic relations. The list of quarrels we have with Trump is so difficult, so long. Trade, NATO, Ukraine, Greenland. So then is Iran and maritime security. Then we have the Palestinian or Israeli-Arab conflict. So there is such a long list that also tells me it's better to distribute the responsibilities of 27, put it on different shoulders, tell 5 to do this and 6 to do that. Use the model of the so-called Med 9 all the EU member states around the Mediterranean, 9 in numbers, are having formed a group. They can take much more care on our conflicts in the Middle East and North Africa, while we are so much concentrating on on helping to solve the Ukrainian conflict. And the Nordics, are very much engaged with Greenland. And they come together every month in Foreign Affairs Council meetings, and they can exchange and let me say, we see if they are in line of their joint agreements. So there are possibilities. It's a question how member states really use them now, and see really the time to act, and not just to have good declarations, but also to put these declarations into real action, that the people in Europe feel Europe is of added value for us. This is important. It's of added value for us.
But Christian, if nothing changes, what is the risk? What does Europe stand to lose in the region?
The risk is, when we look into the Middle East and North Africa, the risk is that China, with their interconnectivity lines, with the Belt and Road Initiative, is, let me say, concentrating all the trade between Europe and the Far East through their tools if we don't act. Russian influence in the Eastern Mediterranean, in Ukraine, in the Black Sea can increase. We have seen in Syria, when they invaded in Syria, they kicked off the refugee wave. So if we don't act in the Eastern Mediterranean, Russia will do. And the diversification of gas imports, for example, worked. We strongly worked with Israel and Egypt on the eastern gas field, with Algeria, for example, with the Gulf. And we invested in the first commission under Madame von der Leyen on green partnership agreements, for example, with Morocco and with other Mediterranean countries, in order to jointly push for a sustainable alternative energy for both sides. So, rebuilding on that tracks of cooperation can help us economically and politically. And if we don't act, others do this for us, and they import more into our region. They make more trouble in our environment, and they count on disruptions in the transatlantic relations.
Let me ask you one final question. Despite all these challenges, where do you still see potential for the EU to act more effectively in the Middle East?
I'm now observing the Middle East and North Africa since 40 years, Josephine. And when you ask me this question, something comes to my mind, when Chancellor Helmut Kohl was pushing in the EU for, the East enlargement of the EU. He was very much aware that as Germany gets bigger in the center of the EU, he has to act with a lot of support, sensitive support for the southern members of the EU vis-à-vis their neighborhood in the Mediterranean, and with all the small EU member states, especially around Germany, that they don't feel threatened, or pressured. And this, an EU policy by the big EU member states that takes into consideration the sensitivities of the countries at the borderlines of the EU, and also in geographical distance, is very important. That means if Germany is more engaged to help the Med9, so the Mediterranean groups, vis-à-vis the conflicts in the Middle East and North Africa, they will much more support us on securing, our security in the East, vis-à-vis Ukraine, the Baltic countries, Poland, and the Baltic Sea. So that is the interconnectivity. That means, our national German policy has to take this much more strongly into interrelation, specifically when it's now a very crucial time when the new budget of the EU for the next 7 years is under negotiation between all 27 member states. That has to be reflected.
Christian, thank you very much for your time.
It was a pleasure reflecting to you the conflicts in the Middle East and North Africa and our European responsibilities.
I appreciate it a lot, Christian. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This was a new episode of Focus Nahost with Christian Hanelt, senior expert on Europe, its neighborhood, and the Middle East at the Bertelsmann Stiftung. You can find the full transcript of this interview in my Substack newsletter. You can also read more about this topic in the policy brief Acting Without Unanimity. I'll link it in the show notes. If you found this conversation valuable, feel free to share it, subscribe to the podcast, and leave a review. It helps ensure that more people can hear these perspectives. And if you're interested in Europe's role in the region more broadly, I recently spoke with Kaja Kallas, EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission. I interviewed her at the Doha Forum in Qatar about Europe's foreign policy, the war in Gaza, and how the EU is trying to position itself in a more fragmented world. My name is Josephine Herrmann. Thank you for listening, and I speak to you soon.